Hello, hi. So I'm back again with a recap of episode 6 of season 5 of The Magicians. And this one, wonderfully enough, is called Apocalypse Now. So, oops, I did it again. Part 2. So after the last episode, I was curious because I noticed that a big underlying storyline that was happening on top of just them attempting to stop the apocalypse was something that was happening with Eliot. And what I was thinking, which I'm sure most people who watched the episode would have thought at first glance, was that it was the god. And not necessarily at first glance, because when Eliot when he saw himself in the mirror, he saw himself as the god. But I think that what that really was his fears being projected. So we start episode 6, and at the end of episode 5, rather than moving the moon, they break the moon. So episode 6 starts with the apocalypse proper. So it's not the same apocalypse. It's still the apocalypse, just different. And they are, they go into problem solve mode. So they're just like, we have a countdown. We know 12 hours is before the moon rocks that they accidentally released when they split the moon in half are about to shower down on Earth. And as we know from history, and science, what happened with the dinosaurs, that if there is a meteor shower that hits the earth, it's definitely going to be apocalyptic, in that it's going to change everything. Now, will everyone die? Like 100% of the people on the earth, or the population, or not even just the people, 100% of life on earth, will that completely go away? No, but it still will be a completely change in what we currently are accustomed to. So they start trying to solve the problem. So, they're pulling out books, they're throwing out ideas, they're trying ideas. And what we quickly notice in episode 6 is that Margot and Eliot are in a time loop because they keep coming back around. So of course they notice. And so then they start to try to figure out why they're in the time loop. They don't try to figure out why they're in the time loop. They try to figure out how to stop the end of the world, and they assume that they are in a time loop because of the moon, because the moon has kind of thrown some type of Hail Mary, and it's like, I don't want to die, because if the earth dies, then of course the moon is going to be directly affected, because the moon is in the gravitational pull of the earth. So they have a symbiotic relationship, and so that's what is at first thought. So while they are trying to solve, of course, they try all of these things, none of them work. Each time the world ends and everyone dies, or at least they die, and they come back. So after they have done this a few times, they do what Margot and Eliot do best. They tap out and party, because they're like, if we're gonna do this, and so their reasoning for partying is, let's just kick it. The world is going to end, so let's just have a blast, and maybe while we're having a blast, we'll get an idea. So they're doing that. So of course for them, that's drinking and partying and imbibing of all of the various things that they can imbibe. And Margot comes up with an idea, and she so she goes to investigate it. But Eliot is kind of freaking out because he keeps hearing the knocking. He keeps seeing the let me out that he was seeing in episode 5. And so he's thinking that the god is trying to come out. And of course, he does not tell Margot. And so she doesn't know what's happening. So when she finally gets an idea that takes her to go see the whales, she goes and does it on her own because Eliot is freaking out. And she just thinks he's just freaking out and upset and he's just overstimulated by all of the various imbibing that they've been doing in the various time loops, because they're about 4 or 5 time loops in, or I think 10. I think they hit like 10. And so she goes off by herself and looks into something with the whales. And then of whatever happens, she's not successful at saving the world, and so they come back to the time loop. Now, what they realized was that something that they had sprayed on themselves in Fillory a couple of episodes ago, which was called permanence. I'm looking at notes here, is what made them get stuck in a time loop. So whatever happens with Margot when she goes off on her own, when everyone dies again and they kind of reset, Eliot realizes that he is now alone in the time loop. And we know, ever since Eliot came back, he has kind of been not alone, but alone. So he's been alone in his struggle and alone in his trying to figure out what happened, trying to come to terms with what happened. But at that same time, so much other stuff was happening, with Quentin dying, with, Fillory being taken over, losing Finn and Josh, like all of those things were happening. So there was not ever a time where Eliot could just be alone with himself and sit in the grief, the confusion, whatever feelings that he's having around what he experienced when the god took him over. Now, that's really all that's left is, of course he wants to stop the apocalypse, but also he's alone. And so he can't, redirect his energy. So like his last, I guess, pass at doing that was with him and Margot decided to just party until they come up with an idea. And then he was able to, medically, he was able to drink and take things and do stuff that had nothing to do with the god and all of that stuff. So now all of that is gone. It's just him alone with his thoughts. And so he continues to hear the knocking and the let me out. He continues to see all of that. And so what I'm looking for is the name. So what happens is when he finally is like, I have to do it because it's knocking at my consciousness, he opens the door where it says, let me out. And it's not the god, it's Charlton. And Charlton was his imaginary friend, I think. And so now he is with, so Charlton, what's that? Okay, I'm completely forgetting where Charlton, I recognize his face, but couldn't remember where he kind of came in. But nonetheless, now Eliot is no longer alone. It's him and Charlton, but also he knows kind of what Margot said to him as part of, I think it was once she was out of the time loop or in the last time loop, where he came to her and told her the truth about thinking that the monster, the god, was still inside of him trying to get out. And she was just like, no, the god is gone. It's really your fears. And what she said was true, but in saying the truth, she dismissed Eliot's feelings, which were, he felt very vulnerable and very much like he still didn't have full control and command of himself because he was still tied to that monster. So when she did that, of course, that made him sad, it hurt his feelings. But really what she said was true, because what was trying to get out was Charlton, because Charlton was stuck in Eliot's memories. And when Eliot got Moonbrain, Charlton was like, ooh, I can come out now because your mental defenses, I guess, are down. And so now Eliot's not alone, and him and Charlton are in the time loop together. And so they are trying to figure out what happened, and then why did Margot get kicked out of the time loop? And so they discover, why she probably got kicked out of the time loop, because she figured she got close to the answer. And so then he goes to Fisher Beach, which is where she went, and he talks to the whales, and then finds out the whale's a magician. So I do appreciate how animals are, like, there's this whole culture of not just humans, but the animals also play an important role in kind of keeping things up. I like that when that pops up on the show. But they find out that the whales are also magicians, and the whales have been tasked with keeping the Kraken dormant. So they trace sigils on the ocean floor to keep the Kraken dormant, because they And then, okay, so here's where it gets funny. So this is where they are keeping the Kraken dormant, but if the Kraken awakens, then their ancestral well magic will turn the time back 12 hours so they can fix it. So they have kind of this fail-safe. The ancestral whales created this fail-safe. So if something ever happened that caused the Kraken to be released, then the time would be set back 12 hours, so then they can fix it, which is what the time loop is. So this time loop that they're in isn't caused by the moon. It's not caused by anything else. It's caused by the whales. And really, the whales are doing it to maintain the Kraken more so than anything, because, I'm sure all of the meteors hitting Earth, or not meteors, the moon rocks, which become meteors through the science, the moon rock is causing the Kraken to be released. So what Eliot realizes, he kind of talks to Charlton. They kind of figure things out. So when they know what, he doesn't talk to Charleston. So what happens? I'm thinking about this and also saying this at the same time. I didn't write as many notes because I was just watching it like, ooh, it's really good. I like what's happening. And so what happens is Eliot talks to his friends. He tells them what's happening. So he talks to them about the time loop. He talks to Margot about how she's got kicked out of the time loop. And so they try to figure out what do we know about whales. And so they realize that what they really just need to do is go talk to the whales and convince them to let the Kraken go, So to release the Kraken, because what they do is they keep trying to hold the Kraken in until the moon rock comes and hits the Earth and kind of forces the Kraken to be released. So they say, you know what, let's just get the Kraken released earlier, so that way when the time loop hits, it'll hit before we broke the moon, and then you were in the time loop, what went wrong, you can fix it. So Eliot goes to talk to the whales. Of course the whales are like, I'm not trying to hear you. They don't want to talk to him, but he appeals to their, I don't know if their kinder nature, their desire to mate in the fall, because apparently whales mate in the fall, and they won't be able to mate. They're not going to be able to mate anymore because the world is going to end, and they're going to stay in this loop where they're trying to, hold the Kraken. So they can't do that. Means they'll never mate again. They'll just kind of continue to fix these issues. So he appeals to them, is like, hey, do you want to get it on again? If so, you need to release the Kraken now. So they release the Kraken now. And then what happens is the time loop kicks in, the ancestral whale magic kicks in, and it works. And Eliot is able to, he comes back before they break the moon, and then he's able to, they're able to fix it. They're able to appropriately ask the moon to move, and they stop the convergence. So it all works out in the end, of course, as we think. But what was interesting to me was the theme, which I said the theme of episode 5 was secrets. That was also the theme of episode 6, but this time it was just Eliot's secret, and why, and how Eliot needed to be honest with really himself. He wasn't being honest with himself, and that was causing issues for him. And that was also causing him to push away his, closest companion, Margot. And so once they were able to save the world from that apocalypse, more on that in a second, they, him and Margot had kind of their conversation. And it definitely, another thing that I noticed that Eliot was dealing with was he felt like, it's almost like when you get stuck in a specific place and everyone around you continues on while you're stuck in that place for whatever reason, and then you come out of that place and you're no longer stuck, but now you're still where you were when you got stuck, and everyone around you has gone forward. And so Eliot felt like, Margot had evolved and falling in love with Josh, and everyone had kind of had these journeys that he did not experience because he was he was taken over by God. So he wasn't having that growth time that they were having. And so but he kind of was. So it was nice to see him have that moment, get clarity around his value to, I guess, the group or just in general, because he was able to make it happen. And, he did not need Margot to do that. Like, he's more than capable. He has more to offer than he probably thinks or felt. And so he got to have that experience. But as with everything, what we discover at the very end of episode 6 is that the apocalypse that we thought was now taken care of, it is on the Earth side, but apparently there's a pending apocalypse on the Fillory side. And I'm sure if Fillory has an apocalypse, it's going to negatively affect Earth. It's a symbiotic relationship. So now Josh comes in, and he's been given the quest that Julia wanted from the dude when she was, going through her loss of magic existential crisis, and he wouldn't give her a quest because she's a woman, because Fillory is very sexist and misogynistic. So he gave it to Josh. And so, of course, Josh is not the warrior type. He came to the person that he knows who is the warrior type, which is Julia. So in the end, it still came to Julia anyway. So now we know at the end of episode 6 that Fillory is at risk of an apocalypse, but we have no idea what it looks like or what it means. So it looks like we'll be going back to Fillory for episode 7. But I will say I really enjoyed this double episode arc, and seeing Eliot go through his own personal reckoning and really coming out on the other side. At minimum, he should feel a little better. And he'll be able to show up more authentically now, because now it's time to save Fillory, which both him and Margot have a deep affection for, because they were the king and queen, or the king and king, the high kings of Fillory. So now we get to dive back into the world of I guess woodland creature magic, whereas not like in the on Earth, where it's like magic in amongst like the people, where we get like now we're fairies and all the other wonderful creatures. And now what I think we're gonna have to attend to or deal with or address is Eliot's relationship with the Dark King. So now that is going to come into play, because there's definitely something there, and it was burgeoning, but they had to leave to go back to Earth to save Earth. So now we have to attend to that. So we'll see what happens. But this was a good episode. This was a good double episode. And kind of seeing them play together, I appreciated that. But I'm very interested to see what they learned from saving the Earth from the Earth apocalypse, what they're going to be, how they can maybe apply that to saving Fillory. So we will see. And then we'll also see the Chatwin lady again, because I'm sure, she is connected to Fillory as well, and I'm sure that'll come up. So it was a good episode, but what were your thoughts about episode 6 and 5? Like together, they were a nice pair. What were your thoughts in the rewatch? Let's chat in the comments below. If you're not following me, I invite you. If you stumbled across this video and are like, ooh, The Magicians, and enjoy this, then follow me. I do other recaps. I also talk about other things related to horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. I might even dip into pop culture occasionally, but more so horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. So I'm starting a community here, so I invite you to follow, click the notification so that you know when I upload a new video. And yeah, if you have some thoughts, some ideas, if you are rewatching these episodes of The Magicians and you notice some nuances that I don't mention, let's talk about it in the comments. There's always so much going on per episode. I'm sure there are some things we can talk about. So I look forward to that. I look forward to watching episode 7 and seeing how things go and chatting with you about it then. Okay, bye.